So, when are you going to stop pretending to be married to a fictional investment banker? My sister, Juliet, aimed the question across the enormous antique mahogany table. The silver of the candelabras glinted, reflecting the predatory gleam in her eyes. Everyone, from my cousins to my father's business partners, paused their conversations and laughed, sharp, loud sounds that felt like physical strikes against my composure. My name is Clara, I'm 34 years old, and I run a small, independent consulting firm specializing in sustainable urban infrastructure in Austin, Texas. That is apparently an embarrassing trade for my family, the elite, old money real estate developers of Highland Park, Dallas. I live modestly, reinvesting almost everything into my company's groundbreaking projects. My family, however, measures worth exclusively in square footage, vintage wine, and the prestige of a last name. The man Juliet referred to, Daniel, was very real, but he'd been working remotely in remote Patagonia for a year on a massive land conservation deal, and my family, incapable of believing a successful man would prioritize saving wild land over building on it, simply assumed I'd invented him to save face. For the last 15 years, I've lived in the shadow of Juliet's perceived perfection. She stayed close to home, married a lawyer named Marcus, who specializes in corporate mergers, and currently manages Dad's portfolio. Everything I did, from studying engineering instead of finance to prioritizing environmental impact over profit, was treated as a rebellion, a poor life choice, or a deliberate attempt to shame the family name. The emotional neglect wasn't subtle. When I secured $50 million in green infrastructure funding for the city last month, my mother asked if the celebratory champagne was at least French, then immediately asked Juliet how her latest development deal was progressing. It was always like walking through a minefield of comparison, where every step I took was either ignored or criticized for not being Juliet's path. My earliest memory of this dynamic is ridiculously specific. I was 9, and I'd won a regional science fair prize for a working model of a solar-powered garden irrigation system. Juliet, who was 11, had won nothing that year, but when Dad gave her a new pony the next week, he announced it was for showing a sophisticated understanding of the family's future needs. Unlike some people, the pony's name was Sterling. I didn't get the irony until I was in college, desperately trying to prove my worth with a double major in civil engineering and environmental studies. The cost of this constant judgment was high. I became perpetually guarded, choosing distance over confrontation, which of course they interpreted as coldness. Clara just doesn't have the social grace, my mother would sigh to her friends. She's too intellectual. A little rough around the edges. The edges were just the parts of me that wouldn't conform to their expectation of a pliable, society-ready trophy daughter. While Juliet practiced her delicate laugh and mastered the art of passive-aggressive commentary, I learned how to structure a city's water flow and design decentralized power grids. My expertise was literally the architecture of the future. Yet in their dining room, I was a failure because I didn't know which fork to use for the oyster course. The true cruelty lay in their financial conditionalism. When I started my firm, Terraform Consulting, I applied to my father for a modest seed investment, a loan I guaranteed to repay within 3 years. He laughed, not unkindly, but with utter condescension. Sustainable infrastructure? Clara, that's charity, not business. Talk to me when you decide to build McMansions or strip malls. Until then, you're on your own. Real money doesn't come from saving the planet. He then gave Juliet a down payment on a new condo for showing excellent market intuition. I walked out of that meeting and realized the only way to earn respect was to achieve success so profound they couldn't deny it. But I had to do it, completely outside their sphere of influence. The scene of my humiliation was my parents' annual Christmas Eve dinner, a truly spectacular affair meant to remind everyone of their wealth. The dining room was draped in velvet and gold, dominated by a 14-foot spruce tree, twinkling with imported antique ornaments. The air smelled of expensive roasting beef and judgmental superiority. I felt intensely conspicuous in my simple, tailored velvet dress amidst the glittering gowns and perfectly manicured faces. I'd arrived late, hoping to avoid the cocktail hour gauntlet. It didn't work. My mother, looking like a flawless porcelain doll in a sapphire gown, intercepted me by the fireplace. "Darling, you look rested. Did you get caught in a rainstorm on the way from Austin? You really must upgrade that little sedan of yours." That was Mom's version of a greeting. The dinner itself was always a calculated social performance. The guest list included the mayor, several prominent bank CEOs, and every competitor my father wanted to subtly intimidate. I was strategically placed next to Marcus, Juliet's husband, because he was the one most skilled at verbally dismantling me without raising his voice. The mockery began almost immediately after the soup course. "Is Daniel finally done saving the endangered field mice this week, Clara?" Marcus asked, stirring his soup with exaggerated patience. Marcus was a corporate shark, utterly focused on profit margins. He couldn't conceive of a powerful man doing work that wasn't immediately visible on the cover of Forbes. "Because I need an introduction. I'm curious how a man who makes enough money to keep you comfortable finds the time to be so eccentric." A ripple of laughter went around the table. "He's wrapping up a long-term project," I replied calmly, cutting into my chicken. I kept my tone level, fighting the familiar surge of internal tension. "It's a complex multi-party land deal. It requires discretion and focus." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but years of practice helped me maintain my neutral expression. "Don't give them the satisfaction, Clara. Don't crack." "Oh, complex multi-party land deal," Juliet parroted, her eyes wide with fake admiration. "That's financier code for he works from his mother's basement and manages a tiny Etsy shop." "Don't lie, Clara. We're family. We worry you'll die alone in a tiny apartment, surrounded by sustainable hemp rugs." She took a delicate bite of bread, her diamond ring, a new, ridiculously oversized one, flashing in my peripheral vision. The cruelty intensified. They weren't just questioning Daniel's existence now. They were questioning my entire judgment. My mother, in a performative sigh, added, "It's just sad, darling. You're almost 35. You need stability. We've set Juliet up for life. We just wish you'd let us do the same for you, instead of clinging to this fantastical life you've built." The assumption was clear. I was still a child needing their protection, a wayward daughter whose little business was destined for failure. The truth was, my small firm was about to close a landmark deal, a deal that would make the kind of money my family only dreamed of building with. But I kept that a secret, focusing instead on Daniel. He'd sent me a cryptic text right before I left for the evening. "Look north, darling. Everything changes tonight." I told myself it was just a sweet, supportive message, but the tension in my stomach refused to ease. I had a feeling the change he meant was far more dramatic than a simple arrival. The history of Daniel Sterling was something my family couldn't comprehend because he had actively built his life against their values. His background was in software, having co-founded a major data analytics firm and selling it young, making his own staggering fortune before he was 30. But instead of retiring to a yacht or a corporate board, he immediately pivoted, funding projects that merged technology with large-scale environmental preservation, the very definition of what my father considered eccentric and unprofitable. Daniel and I met at a conference on water scarcity, arguing over the efficiency of modular treatment plants. It wasn't romantic. It was intellectual combustion. He loved that my solutions focused on resilient, long-term community good, not short-term developer profit. His Patagonia conservation deal was about using his wealth and tech to permanently protect millions of acres of land, keeping his operation intentionally off-grid and discreet to avoid the kind of corporate surveillance and sabotage he'd learned to anticipate. He knew about the Northwood Mansion. Everyone in Highland Park did. It was the white whale of my father's development empire, a sprawling 20-acre estate next to his own property, sitting vacant for years, owned by a mysterious entity. My father had leveraged political contacts and immense cash to try and force a sale, seeing it as the crown jewel of his next luxury subdivision. 2 months ago, I was on a video call with Daniel when he mentioned he was diverting a major chunk of his South American funds. "I'm going after your father's white whale, Clara," he'd said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "The owner is a shell corporation I set up years ago. I've been waiting for your father's offer to peak." The land was perfect for his next big vision, an urban, self-sustaining community hub focused on power generation and vertical farming. A direct, physical monument to the sustainability my family mocked, built right next to their palace of old money. I'd tried to convince Daniel to wait, to be softer, but he'd been insistent. "Your family needs a consequence, You are a disgrace to this family, Amelia. A complete and utter disgrace." My mother's voice was icy, echoing slightly in the grand entrance hall of her house. She stood framed by the enormous Thanksgiving floral arrangement, perfectly coiffed, her expression a mask of elegant contempt. The insult wasn't meant just for me. My sister Clara and her fiancé Richard stood nearby, ready to chime in. I felt my cheeks burn, clutching the bottle of cheap wine I'd brought, already mentally rehearsing my practiced silent retreat. Everyone else was already in the living room, waiting for the football game to start and the pre-dinner mingling to begin. My name is Amelia, and I'm 31 years old. I live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment downtown and work 2 demanding jobs. I'm a night shift software engineer for a logistics startup, and I spend my days running a tiny independent accounting consultancy for local nonprofits. I'm exhausted, perpetually short on sleep, and, according to my family, professionally invisible. In contrast, my younger sister Clara, 28, is the golden child. She has a prestigious, well-paying job in finance, which she admittedly hates, and is engaged to Richard, a partner at a large old-money law firm. They live in the suburbs in a house my parents helped pay for. The disgrace, in my mother's view, was twofold: my appearance and my finances. I was wearing a simple, inexpensive dress I'd found secondhand, and my hands, rough from carrying heavy equipment at my night job, contrasted sharply with Clara's perfectly manicured nails and flawless diamond. But the core conflict ran far deeper than superficial differences. For years, I had been the family's punching bag, the scapegoat for any deviation from their rigid standards of success, which were solely measured in conspicuous wealth and social status. When I chose computer science over business school, my father barely spoke to me for a year. When I refused to give up my nonprofit work, which paid poorly but felt meaningful, to take a real corporate job, my mother started referring to me as the failure at social gatherings. Clara naturally was the success. The long-term conflict was a slow poison woven into the fabric of my childhood. Clara was consistently favored, receiving lavish praise for mediocre achievements, while my own high grades and early accomplishments were dismissed as mere academic diligence lacking sparkle. I remember winning a national coding competition in high school, only for my mother to ask, "Did you wear a nice dress to the awards dinner? Or did you look like a librarian, Amelia?" The message was clear. My intelligence was irrelevant if it didn't serve their social ambition. My decision to take a second job wasn't born out of desperation, as they assumed, but from a calculated plan. I was quietly building something monumental, a fact I had painstakingly kept secret from them. I knew the moment I revealed any success, they would claim credit, try to control it, or find a way to pivot the praise to Clara. I had spent years meticulously gathering capital, not just financial, but intellectual, building a network that operated entirely outside their high society bubble. This Thanksgiving gathering was the tinder that lit the fire. It was supposed to be a small, intimate family lunch before the larger crowd arrived. But as usual, my parents had invited a few key people: Richard's parents, the CEO of my father's real estate firm, and several affluent neighbors. The atmosphere was stiflingly formal. I walked in late, having just finished a 10-hour shift, smelling faintly of stale coffee and machine lubricant. My mother had intercepted me in the hall, clearly intending to deliver a preemptive strike to ensure I maintained my proper role as the quiet, slightly embarrassing sister. "Honestly, Amelia, look at you," my mother continued, gesturing dismissively towards my simple silk dress. "It's Thanksgiving, not a work site. Why do you even need 2 jobs? It only shows a lack of financial planning. It shows desperation. Clara, darling, tell your sister how a truly successful person manages their time." Clara gave me a look of pity, the kind of pity that tasted like condescension. "It's true, Amy. Richard and I were just discussing how stressful it must be. You should really think about dropping one of the jobs, or maybe let Dad set you up with something more respectable." Richard, the lawyer, stepped in with the final humiliating blow. He smiled tightly, his eyes scanning my dress and the cheap bottle of wine in my hand. "With all due respect, Amelia, if you're working 2 jobs just to cover basic living expenses, you should reevaluate your life choices. That's not dedication. That's running on a treadmill. We all know you have a brilliant mind, but you've squandered your potential. It's a shame." The quiet hum of conversation from the living room felt deafening as I stood there, taking the full force of their casual cruelty. The humiliation scene was complete. My hands trembled, But it wasn't from fear or shame. It was pure, cold adrenaline. For a moment, I saw myself as they saw me, exhausted, cheap, and failing. I saw the years of emotional neglect, the constant comparison, the relentless erosion of my self-worth. It had to stop. This was the maximum emotional low point, and it was time for the turn. I forced myself to smile. Not the weak smile of compliance, but a slow, genuine smile of sudden, total clarity. "Thank you for your concern, Richard," I said, my voice low and dangerously even. "But I assure you my 2 jobs are quite necessary. One is for purpose and the other is for power." My mother scoffed. "Power? What on earth are you talking about, Amelia? The power to pay your electric bill?" "In a way, yes," I replied. "You see, the first job, the nonprofit consulting, is what I love. The second job, the night shift coding, is what has allowed me to keep a secret for the last 3 years. A huge secret." Clara narrowed her eyes. "What secret? Are you secretly dating someone?" "We told you. You don't need to lie." I shook my head slowly, setting the cheap wine down on the antique mahogany table. "I'm not dating anyone, Clara. My secret is purely professional. The logistics startup I've been working at, the one that requires the brutal night shifts, has been building proprietary software to automate and digitize supply chains worldwide. We were recently acquired by a much larger firm." My father, who had been listening with an air of bored tolerance, suddenly showed interest. "Acquired? Who was the buyer?" "That's the thing, Dad," I continued, walking slowly toward the entrance to the living room, forcing them to follow me. "They weren't just acquired. The startup was a shell company designed to develop a proof of concept for the new parent company. I wasn't just an engineer. I was leading the team developing the core, disruptive technology. In fact, over the last year, I haven't been working for the startup. I've been working for the buyer, managing the integration." We reached the archway leading to the living room, where Richard's parents and the CEO of my father's firm, Mr. Davies, were sitting, drinks in hand. "And who is the parent company?" my mother demanded, her voice rising with sudden nervous excitement, sensing a possible social coup if the company was prestigious enough. Immediately, I got in, closing the door on the perfect, expensive house that had never been a home, and watched the Thanksgiving scene disappear behind me. I didn't need their table. I had just purchased my own, and for the first time, the brutal exhaustion felt like a justified price for the most priceless commodity: freedom from their judgment. The sedan pulled away smoothly, separating me from the silence I had shattered. I watched in the side mirror as my mother staggered back a step, leaning against the doorframe, her elegant composure utterly destroyed. My father stood paralyzed, his eyes wide and vacant, likely calculating the dozens of professional opportunities he had just unknowingly scorned. Clara was still staring at the glass window, her golden facade of effortless superiority crumbling under the weight of an unwelcome, undeniable truth. Richard, the slick, polished lawyer, looked like a small, damp rodent caught in the blinding headlights of the world-class humiliation I had just delivered. Inside the house, the moment I left, chaos erupted. Mr. Davies, the CEO of my father's firm, was the first to move, shouting into his phone to his secretary. "Get me the Nexus Global press release. Find out who this Amelia Vance is immediately. No, wait. Call my broker. I need to know our exposure to the old GNX contracts." His frantic energy shattered the stunned silence. "Margaret, what have you done?" My father finally roared, turning on my mother, his face a mask of shock and accusation. "That's Amelia, our daughter, the youngest CEO of a billion-dollar division. And you called her a disgrace." My mother, for once in her life, lost her voice. She merely gasped, her ambition warring violently with her sudden, overwhelming shame. I thought, the night job, the poverty." "She never said anything," she stammered, pulling off her diamond necklace as if it had suddenly become too heavy. Her greatest fear wasn't that she had hurt me, but that she had catastrophically miscalculated a social opportunity. Clara, the golden child, burst into tears, her performance entirely different from the usual, controlled drama. This was genuine, bewildered despair. "It was supposed to be my turn. My success. She said she was working in a cramped apartment. How could she hide this from me? We're sisters." Richard, seeing his prospective father-in-law cornered and realizing the profound error he had made in dismissing the new technology czar, tried desperately to salvage the situation. Mr. Vance, sir, please. We need to understand the new corporate structure. Amelia, Ms. Vance, and I have excellent contacts in corporate law. We could be invaluable to her legal team during the transition. But my father was beyond listening. He was staring at the empty space where I had been, finally understanding the true cost of his years of neglect. She said the AI, the code she wrote, he muttered, defeated. The guests, including Richard's parents, quickly made awkward excuses and retreated from the scene of the family implosion. Thanksgiving dinner was ruined, replaced by the bitter, indigestible reality of the family's hierarchy being brutally overturned. My first communication from the family arrived precisely 6 hours later, while I was airborne over the Pacific, enjoying the quiet luxury of the company jet's private cabin. My private cell, reserved only for my closest team and now my executive assistant, remained silent. My old personal phone, which I checked purely out of morbid curiosity, was a disaster zone. First, there were the texts from Clara. They started as confused pleas. Amy, please call me back. I don't understand the TV news. Is this a joke? And then shifted to frantic, demanding entitlement. You have to include Richard in this. He's a corporate lawyer. You need him. This is a family company now. They ended with bitter accusation. You planned this. You deliberately waited until the family was gathered just to humiliate us. That's cruel, Amelia. Next came the voicemails from my mother. She had moved past shame and was firmly in the exploitation phase. Her voice dripped with saccharine affection, calling me darling Amelia and referring to herself as your proud, devoted mother. She casually name-dropped the Nexus Global CEO title to her friends, then quickly pivoted to demanding. Darling, your father needs to speak to your board immediately. Mr. Davies has scheduled a meeting. But if you could just call him, let him know our family is aligned with Nexus. It would save Daddy's firm a fortune. The only call that held a trace of genuine, if deeply flawed humanity was from my father. He didn't threaten or demand. He merely sounded weary. Amelia, his voice rasped. I saw the news. I'm proud of you. I truly am. But please don't forget where you came from. We're still your family. Don't let this success change you. He failed, however, to acknowledge the one thing that mattered. His own failures. I forwarded all communications to my new executive assistant, an unflappable woman named Simone, with a single, clear directive. Filter and categorize. Any message involving a financial ask, a professional introduction, or a demand for contact goes into the vultures file. Respond only with the formal corporate contact information and a note stating, all corporate inquiries must be submitted through the official Nexus Global Legal Department. I spent the next week in Tokyo, Jakarta, and Frankfurt, restructuring a multi-billion-dollar division, attending executive summits, and delivering key presentations. Every decision I made was now measured in terms of global impact. The world I was operating in was so far removed from my mother's stiflingly small, judgment-filled living room that the entire Thanksgiving incident felt like a scene from a poorly written play I had thankfully left. 2 weeks after the Thanksgiving detonation, I was scheduled to return to my home base, my new minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline, not the cramped one-bedroom downtown. I hadn't told anyone I was moving, another intentional strategic oversight. Clara, having exhausted all polite avenues, decided on a last, desperate, face-to-face intervention. She messaged my old personal number. Amy, Richard, and I are coming over Saturday morning. We need to talk about the family and about how we can help you with your new role. Please, let's fix this. We love you. I knew the move-in was scheduled for that Saturday morning. It was poetic. On the agreed-upon morning, Clara and Richard arrived at my old apartment building downtown. The neighborhood was gentrifying, but the building was still visibly tired. Clara, dressed in expensive designer casual wear, looked utterly out of place as she stood before the worn buzzer panel. This is ridiculous, Clara, Richard muttered, adjusting the cuff of his cashmere sweater. We should have demanded the meeting be at your parents' house. I have a major corporate client presentation on Monday. I shouldn't be here. She won't answer our calls, Richard. We have to force the issue. She's family. She can't just ignore us when she's running a global corporation. She needs us to keep her grounded, Clara replied, her voice bordering on shrill. She buzzed my old apartment number repeatedly. No answer. After 15 minutes of furious buzzing and frantic text messages that bounced back unanswered, Clara turned to Richard, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "She's not home. She's doing this deliberately," Richard sighed, already calculating his next legal move. "She's probably at her nonprofit." "Job, Clara. You said she works on Saturday mornings." "I know. That stupid, worthless accounting job. The one she took out of spite!" Clara shrieked. She'd rather be auditing some soup kitchen than dealing with her family. Unbeknownst to them, I wasn't auditing a soup kitchen. I was sitting in my new 40th floor office, watching the live feed from my doorbell camera. The camera was installed at my old nonprofit client's office, the very office where they thought I would be working. Instead, my nonprofit consulting client, a small but dedicated environmental group, had arranged a press conference that morning. I had quietly funneled a 7-figure anonymous donation through my new CEO slush fund to their organization. The press conference, live-streamed on a local news channel, showed the organization's director, Mr. Thomas, standing at a podium. "Today, we are announcing the largest anonymous private donation in our organization's history." Mr. Thomas beamed to the local news cameras. "This staggering investment of $10 million will fully fund our next decade of coastal cleanup and educational programs." While the donor insisted on anonymity, they wished to convey one message. Real value is measured by the change you create, not the status you accrue. The timing was deliberate. They were looking for me at the location of the purpose job, completely unaware that I was watching them from the seat of my new power job, and had already delivered the ultimate ethical twist. Clara and Richard eventually retreated to my parents' house, where the Thanksgiving chaos had only intensified. My father, in a desperate attempt to claw back some professional standing, had sent an obsequious email to Nexus Global, requesting a partnership on behalf of his real estate firm. The reply, signed by Simone, was a form letter directing him to the General Inquiries portal. The professional coldness was crushing. 3 days later, my father called me, not on my old personal cell, but on my new executive line, which he had managed to obtain through a desperate call to Mr. Davies' terrified assistant. "Amelia, I need to talk to you. Privately. No demands, no mother, just you and me," he said, his voice stripped of its old arrogance. I agreed to a video call the next morning. I needed to see this through to the final, necessary closure. When the call connected, my father looked a decade older. He wasn't in his usual tailored suit. He was in a sweater, looking defeated. "Amelia, I've seen the news reports. I saw the Nexus Global announcement. I know what you've achieved." "Yes, Dad," I said simply. "I want to apologize," he said, but his apology was fragile and conditional. "I apologize for not seeing your potential sooner. I apologize for letting your mother's snobbery dictate how we treated you. You are an incredible woman, Amelia, and you've achieved more than Clara or I ever will." I waited, letting the silence hang. He had apologized for his miscalculation, not his cruelty. But I also called because Mr. Davies' firm is pulling out of our major development deal. They're scared of the new Nexus AI driving down logistics costs and disrupting the market. We're facing huge losses, Amelia. You have to understand your position now, your influence. You could save us. You could schedule a quick private talk with Mr. Davies. Just your word would be enough. And there it was, the final transactional request. My worth even now was measured by what I could do for them. "You still don't understand, do you, Dad?" I asked, leaning back in my executive chair. The sun glinted off the glass towers outside my window. "When I was 17 and won that national coding competition, you asked if I looked like a librarian. When I was 25 and started my nonprofit consulting, you called it a financial weakness. My potential wasn't unseen, Dad. It was actively rejected because it didn't fit your approved mold. You always chose status over character." He looked down, broken. "I know, I'm sorry for that. But we are your family. Doesn't that count for anything now? A chance to rebuild?" "You had 2 chances to rebuild," I countered. "The first was every single day for 31 years. The second was this morning, when you finally admitted I was wrong, only to immediately ask me for a $1 billion favor. You came to me seeking power, Dad, not reconciliation." I took a deep breath. "I have no professional interest in saving your firm, and I have no personal interest in a relationship that remains strictly transactional. The apology is noted, but the debt is not forgiven. My commitment is to the people who always saw the worth in the nonprofit work, not the people who only saw the dollar signs attached to my new title." I ended the call gently, but definitively. The brutal honesty was a final, necessary cut to sever the toxic connection entirely. In the years that followed, my success became undeniable and globally recognized. Nexus Global's technology and logistics division, under my leadership, became a powerhouse. My AI platform revolutionizing supply chains and making me one of the most powerful women in the global tech space. But the real, profound sense of fulfillment came not from the boardrooms, but from the financial power my achievement unlocked. My first immediate act as CEO was to establish the Vance Foundation for Disruptive Altruism. Its singular focus, providing massive, unrestricted funding for small, overlooked nonprofits like the one I had worked with, empowering the purpose-driven visionaries of the world. The anonymous $10 million donation I'd made at the time of my reveal was merely the seed fund. As for my family, their lives became a bitter testament to the karma of transactional living. My mother eventually retired from society, unable to bear the constant shame. She was forever known in their small circle as the mother who called the Nexus CEO a disgrace. Her social standing, built entirely on appearances, collapsed completely. Richard was passed over for partner at his law firm, his judgmental Thanksgiving comments about Ms. Vance's life choices, having somehow, through the silent, powerful network of corporate connections, reached the decision-makers. Clara eventually left Richard, finding her own financial career far less appealing when the golden child narrative evaporated. She moved back home, perpetually overshadowed by the ghost of the sister who had soared. I never spoke to any of them again. They tried, of course, holidays, birthdays, formal requests for family counsel, but every email was met with the same professional, impenetrable wall. All inquiries must be submitted through the official Nexus Global Legal Department. My personal life was finally mine. The crushing exhaustion of running 2 jobs was replaced by the exhilarating fatigue of leading a global enterprise, balanced by the serene satisfaction of directing my foundation's wealth toward genuine good. The ultimate reflection was simple. I had proved my worth to the world, and in doing so, I had finally proved my worth to myself. My mother had sought to break me by calling me a disgrace for working 2 jobs, one for purpose, one for power. In the end, the very dedication she scorned built a title that bought me permanent freedom. The shame wasn't mine. It belonged to the family that traded unconditional love for conditional pride, and it was a currency they were forced to pay for the rest of their lives.